Lieutenant Sarah Martinez walked through the bustling corridors of the Pentagon, her polished boots clicking against the marble floors. At 28 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from years of military service, but today felt different. Today, she was attending her first high-level briefing as the newly appointed liaison between the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Defense. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed to perfection, with every ribbon and patch precisely positioned according to military regulations. The patches told the story of her remarkable journey: combat engineer certification, airborne qualification, and most notably, the distinctive patch of the 82nd Airborne Division's Engineering Battalion. What made her patches unique were the small, specialized insignia that most people overlooked: humanitarian mission ribbons from disaster relief operations, a rare engineering innovation award, and the coveted expert field medical badge. As Sarah approached the conference room, she could hear voices drifting through the partially open door. A group of senior military contractors and mid-level Pentagon officials were gathered around the mahogany table, their conversations filled with the casual arrogance that often accompanied power and privilege. "Did you see the new liaison they're sending?" sneered Richard Hawthorne, a defense contractor in his 50s who had made millions from military supply contracts. Some young lieutenant with a chest full of participation trophies. Colonel James Bradley, a career officer who had spent more time behind a desk than in the field, chuckled as he adjusted his tie. "These days they hand out ribbons for everything. Probably got half those patches for showing up on time." Major Patricia Wells, who had climbed the ranks through political maneuvering rather than field experience, shook her head dismissively. "I heard she's from some small-town engineering unit. What could she possibly know about real military operations? These diversity hires are getting out of hand." The conversation continued with increasingly cruel comments about Sarah's qualifications, her age, and the perceived value of her service record. They assumed that her patches were merely decorative, symbols of a military that had gone soft rather than the hard-earned recognition of extraordinary service and sacrifice. What they didn't know was that each patch on Sarah's uniform represented a story of courage, innovation, and selfless service that went far beyond what any of them had ever accomplished. The humanitarian ribbon came from her deployment to Haiti after the devastating earthquake, where she had designed and built emergency water purification systems that saved thousands of lives. The Engineering Innovation Award was earned when she developed a revolutionary bridge building technique that reduced construction time by 60% while increasing structural integrity. The expert field medical badge represented months of additional training she had undertaken voluntarily, driven by her desire to save lives in combat zones. During her deployment in Afghanistan, she had used these skills to treat wounded soldiers when medics were unavailable, earning the respect and admiration of every soldier in her unit. Her airborne qualification wasn't just another patch. It represented her completion of one of the military's most grueling training programs, where she had excelled despite being one of only 3 women in her class. The 82nd Airborne Engineering patch symbolized her role in some of the most dangerous and critical missions of the past decade, including the construction of forward operating bases in hostile territory under enemy fire. As Sarah paused outside the conference room door, she took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She had faced enemy fire, natural disasters, and countless challenges throughout her military career. A room full of arrogant officials would not intimidate her. She knocked firmly on the door and waited for permission to enter. "Come in," called Colonel Bradley, his tone already dismissive before he had even seen who was entering. Sarah stepped into the room, her bearing professional and confident despite the hostile atmosphere she could immediately sense. The conversation stopped abruptly as all eyes turned toward her, taking in her youthful appearance and the patches that had been the subject of their mockery just moments before. "Good morning," Sarah said clearly, her voice steady and professional. "Lieutenant Sarah Martinez reporting for the infrastructure briefing." The silence in the room was palpable as the officials exchanged glances, some looking embarrassed while others maintained their skeptical expressions. Richard Hawthorne was the first to speak, his voice dripping with condescension. "Well, Lieutenant, I hope you're ready for some real military discussion. This isn't basic training." Sarah met his gaze steadily, her expression remaining neutral despite the obvious insult. "I'm prepared to contribute to whatever discussion is necessary, sir." Major Wells gestured toward an empty chair at the far end of the table, clearly intending to minimize Sarah's presence in the meeting. Why don't you take a seat and observe? You might learn something about how these operations really work." As Sarah moved toward the indicated chair, she noticed the way the others in the room continued to study her uniform with barely concealed disdain. Their whispered comments and exchanged looks made it clear that they viewed her as an inexperienced outsider who had somehow stumbled into a position far above her capabilities. What none of them realized was that Sarah's expertise in engineering and her innovative approaches to problem-solving had already caught the attention of the highest levels of military leadership. Her work had been quietly reviewed and praised by some of the most respected figures in the Pentagon, including officials they would never dream of questioning. The irony of the situation was not lost on Sarah as she took her seat and prepared to endure what she knew would be a challenging meeting. These men and women, so quick to judge her based on assumptions and prejudices, had no idea that they were about to witness something that would change their perspective forever. The briefing began with Colonel Bradley presenting the quarterly infrastructure assessment, his PowerPoint slides filled with budget projections and timeline estimates. As he droned on about standard procurement procedures and established protocols, Sarah listened carefully while making notes on her tablet. Her engineering background allowed her to quickly identify several inefficiencies and potential cost savings in the proposed plans. Richard Hawthorne took over the presentation, outlining his company's proposal for a new forward operating base construction project. The timeline he presented was 18 months with a budget of $47 million. As he spoke, Sarah's experienced eye caught several red flags in the engineering specifications and resource allocation. The foundation requirements seem excessive for the soil conditions in that region, Sarah said quietly, raising her hand slightly. Hawthorne paused mid-sentence, his expression showing clear annoyance at being interrupted by someone he considered beneath his notice. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant, but these specifications have been developed by some of the most experienced engineers in the industry." "With respect, sir," Sarah continued, maintaining her professional demeanor, "I've built similar structures in comparable soil conditions during my deployment. The current specifications would actually create structural weaknesses due to over-engineering for the specific ground composition." Major Wells rolled her eyes dramatically. "Lieutenant, I think the professionals here have a bit more experience than someone fresh out of the field." The tension in the room was growing thicker by the minute. Sarah could feel the collective dismissal of her expertise, but she had learned long ago that respect had to be earned through demonstration rather than demanded through rank or credentials. She decided to remain quiet for the remainder of the presentation, taking detailed notes on the numerous problems she identified. As Hawthorne continued his pitch, he outlined a complex logistics plan that would require multiple supply convoys and extended construction timelines. His confidence was evident as he described the tried-and-true methods his company had used for decades, methods that Sarah knew were outdated and unnecessarily expensive. "Our approach has been proven successful in 12 previous installations," Hawthorne declared proudly. "We believe in sticking with what works." Colonel Bradley nodded approvingly. "Reliability is certainly important in military operations." Sarah bit her tongue, knowing that the proven methods Hawthorne described had been responsible for cost overruns and delays in several recent projects. She had studied these cases extensively during her advanced engineering training and had developed alternative approaches that could cut both time and costs significantly. The meeting continued with discussions about personnel assignments, equipment procurement, and security protocols. Throughout these conversations, the other attendees continued to treat Sarah as an observer rather than a participant. Despite her official role as the engineering liaison, their comments became increasingly pointed, with subtle jabs about inexperience and the supposed lowering of military standards. "It's refreshing to work with people who understand the real challenges of military engineering," Major Wells commented, looking directly at Sarah while addressing the contractors. "Not everyone appreciates the complexity of these operations." Sarah maintained her composure, though she could feel her patience wearing thin. She had dealt with condescension and discrimination throughout her military career, but it never became easier to endure. What kept her focused was the knowledge that her work spoke louder than any argument she could make with words. As the briefing moved into its second hour, Colonel Bradley introduced a problem that had been plaguing the Pentagon for months. A critical infrastructure project in Eastern Europe had encountered unexpected challenges. with construction delays mounting and costs spiraling out of control. 3 different engineering firms had proposed solutions, but none had been able to provide a viable path forward. The situation is becoming politically sensitive, Bradley explained, his tone growing more serious. We need innovative thinking, but we also need proven results. The timeline is compressed and failure is not an option. Sarah's attention sharpened as Bradley described the technical challenges. The project involved building a strategic communications facility in a region with unstable soil conditions, frequent seismic activity, and extreme weather patterns. The previous engineering solutions had focused on traditional approaches that failed to account for the unique combination of environmental factors. As she listened to the details, Sarah realized that she had encountered similar challenges during her deployment in Afghanistan, where she had successfully developed adaptive engineering solutions for comparable conditions. Her innovative approach had not only solved the immediate problems, but had become a model for future projects in difficult environments. Richard Hawthorne stood up to address the room, his chest puffed with confidence. My company has dealt with difficult terrain before. We propose a reinforced foundation system with deep pilings and extensive drainage. It will take 14 months and cost approximately $62 million, but it will be solid. Major Wells nodded enthusiastically. That sounds like the kind of robust approach we need. Sarah could no longer remain silent. The solution Hawthorne proposed was not only expensive and time-consuming, but would likely fail within 5 years due to the specific geological conditions in the region. She had seen similar approaches fail catastrophically in similar environments. Colonel Bradley, Sarah said, her voice clear and confident, I believe there may be a more effective approach to consider. The room fell silent, and Sarah could feel the weight of everyone's attention focusing on her. Hawthorne's face flushed with irritation, while Major Wells shook her head in obvious disapproval. But Sarah had reached the point where she could no longer sit quietly while watching a preventable disaster unfold. Lieutenant, Colonel Bradley said slowly, his tone carrying a warning, I think we should stick to hearing from the experienced contractors. Sir, I understand your concern, Sarah replied respectfully, but I have direct experience with similar geological and environmental challenges. There's an adaptive foundation system that could solve these problems in 8 months for $35 million, with a 50-year reliability guarantee. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard Hawthorne's face turned red with indignation as he stared at Sarah across the conference table. The audacity of this young lieutenant challenging his multi-million-dollar proposal in front of Pentagon officials was beyond his comprehension. His voice dripped with sarcasm as he responded, Lieutenant, with all due respect, my company has been building military installations since before you were born. Are you seriously suggesting that someone with your limited experience knows better than teams of professional engineers with decades of expertise? Major Wells leaned forward, her expression stern and disapproving. This is exactly the kind of overconfidence we see from junior officers who think they know everything after a single deployment. Real engineering requires years of experience and proven track records. Sarah remained calm despite the personal attacks, her military training helping her maintain composure under pressure. She had anticipated this reaction, but she also knew that lives and millions of taxpayer dollars were at stake. Her solution wasn't theoretical. It was based on real-world application and measurable results. Mr. Hawthorne, Sarah said respectfully, I'm not questioning your company's experience. I'm offering an alternative approach based on specific technical innovations that have been successfully tested in comparable conditions. Colonel Bradley held up his hand to quiet the growing tension in the room. While he shared the skepticism of his colleagues, his military training demanded that he at least hear out a fellow officer's proposal. Lieutenant Martinez, you have 2 minutes to explain your approach. Sarah stood and moved to the presentation screen, her movements confident and purposeful. She had given briefings under much more challenging circumstances, including presentations to field commanders while under enemy fire. A room full of skeptical officials was manageable in comparison. The fundamental problem with traditional deep piling foundations and seismically active regions with unstable soil is that they fight against natural ground movement instead of adapting to it, Sarah began, her voice clear and authoritative. During my deployment in Afghanistan, we encountered similar challenges when building FOB resilience in the Hindu Kush Mountains. She pulled up a tablet and began sketching a technical diagram on the digital whiteboard, her engineering expertise evident in the precision of her drawings. The adaptive foundation system uses a network of interconnected, flexible supports that move with seismic activity while maintaining structural integrity. It's similar to how traditional Japanese architecture survives earthquakes. As Sarah continued her explanation, the technical sophistication of her approach became increasingly apparent. She described shock-absorbing materials, distributed load systems, and innovative drainage solutions that addressed each of the environmental challenges that had stymied previous engineering teams. The construction timeline is reduced because we're working with natural forces rather than against them, Sarah explained, her diagram becoming more detailed. Instead of waiting months for deep pilings to cure and settle, the adaptive system can be installed in sections and becomes more stable over time as it adjusts to local conditions. Richard Hawthorne scoffed loudly, but Sarah noticed that he was paying close attention to her technical specifications. This sounds like experimental nonsense. Military construction requires proven methods, not untested theories. It's not untested, Sarah replied firmly. FOB Resilience has been operational for 3 years in conditions that destroyed 2 previous installations. It survived a 6.2 magnitude earthquake last year with 0 structural damage. The Army Corps of Engineers has certified the design for use in similar applications. Major Wells crossed her arms defensively. If this design is so revolutionary, why haven't we heard about it before? Surely something this significant would have come to our attention through proper channels. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but inwardly she smiled. This was the question she had been waiting for, the one that would reveal just how out of touch these officials were with actual field innovations. The design was classified until 6 months ago due to its strategic applications. It's been gradually declassified as part of the Army's technology transfer initiative. The room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's statement sank in. She wasn't just proposing an alternative approach. She was revealing that she had been involved in classified military engineering projects that were beyond the security clearance level of most people in the room. Colonel Bradley's demeanor shifted noticeably. As a career military officer, he understood the significance of classified engineering projects and the level of trust and expertise required to be involved in such work. Lieutenant, are you saying you were part of the development team for this system? Yes, sir, Sarah replied matter-of-factly. I was the lead field engineer for the implementation phase. The project was a joint initiative between the Army Corps of Engineers and DARPA's Infrastructure Resilience Program. The mention of DARPA, the Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, sent a ripple of recognition through the room. Even the contractors knew that DARPA involvement indicated cutting-edge technology with significant military applications. Richard Hawthorne's confident expression was beginning to crack as he realized that he might be dealing with someone far more qualified than he had assumed. Even if this system exists, implementing experimental technology in a critical infrastructure project would be extremely risky. Sarah turned back to her diagram, adding cost projections and timeline comparisons. The risk assessment was completed 2 years ago. The system has a 0.2% failure rate compared to 15% for traditional methods in similar conditions. The cost savings come from reduced material requirements, faster installation, and lower long-term maintenance needs. As she spoke, Sarah's expertise became undeniable. Her technical knowledge, her familiarity with classified projects, and her practical experience in challenging deployments painted a picture of someone far more accomplished than anyone in the room had imagined. Major Wells shifted uncomfortably in her seat, beginning to realize that her dismissive attitude might have been premature. Where exactly did you serve in Afghanistan, Lieutenant? Multiple locations, ma'am, Sarah replied. My primary assignment was with the 82nd Airborne's Engineering Battalion, but I was also attached to special operations units for infrastructure development in contested areas. The casual mention of special operations work sent another shock through the room. Such assignments required the highest levels of security clearance and demonstrated exceptional competence and reliability. Sarah's patches were beginning to make more sense to those who understood their true significance. Colonel Bradley was studying Sarah with new interest, his earlier dismissiveness replaced by professional curiosity. Lieutenant, what's your current assignment? I'm the Pentagon's new liaison for advanced engineering technologies, sir. My role is to identify and implement innovative solutions for critical infrastructure challenges. The irony was becoming clear to everyone in the room. They had been mocking the qualifications of someone who had been specifically chosen to solve the exact problems they were discussing. The atmosphere in the conference room had shifted dramatically as the reality of Sarah's qualifications began to sink in. Colonel Bradley found himself reassessing everything he had assumed about the young lieutenant standing before them. Her technical presentation was not only sophisticated, but demonstrated a level of practical experience that surpassed most of the contractors his office regularly worked with. Richard Hawthorne, however, was not ready to concede defeat. His company's reputation and a significant contract were at stake, and he had built his career on the ability to navigate Pentagon politics. Lieutenant, even assuming your system works as advertised, implementing unproven technology would require extensive approval processes. My company's proposal can begin immediately with established supply chains and verified materials. Sarah nodded respectfully, understanding the political realities that Hawthorne was referencing. You're absolutely correct about the approval process, sir. However, the Adaptive Foundation System has already received preliminary approval from the Army Corps of Engineers for this specific application. The documentation was submitted 3 weeks ago. Major Wells looked puzzled and slightly embarrassed. I don't recall seeing any documentation about alternative foundation systems. The proposal was submitted directly to the Secretary of the Army's office as part of the Accelerated Technology Implementation Protocol, Sarah explained calmly. Given the strategic importance of the project and the time constraints, it bypassed the standard committee review process. The mention of the Secretary of the Army's office created another moment of uncomfortable silence. Everyone in the room understood that such high-level involvement indicated that Sarah's proposal had serious backing from the very top of the military hierarchy. Colonel Bradley cleared his throat, his professional demeanor masking his growing concern that he might have seriously misjudged the situation. Lieutenant, are you saying that the Secretary's office is aware of your involvement in this project? Yes, sir, Sarah replied. In fact, I'm scheduled to present a detailed implementation plan to the Secretary's Infrastructure Committee next week. Today's briefing was intended to gather input from field-level personnel and contractors to refine the proposal. The implications of her statement hit the room like a bombshell. Rather than being an inexperienced observer learning from seasoned professionals, Sarah was actually evaluating them as potential partners in a project that had already gained high-level approval. Their dismissive treatment of her wasn't just unprofessional, it was potentially damaging to their own interests. Richard Hawthorne's face had gone pale as he realized the magnitude of his miscalculation. I wasn't aware that the project had reached that level of consideration. Sarah maintained her professional composure, though she was beginning to enjoy watching the arrogant officials squirm as they realized their mistake. The situation is evolving rapidly due to changing strategic priorities in the region. The traditional 18-month timeline is no longer acceptable, which is why alternative approaches are being considered. Major Wells frantically shuffled through her paperwork, looking for any reference to the accelerated timeline or alternative technologies. Her confident dismissal of Sarah's qualifications was now looking like a career-damaging error in judgment. Lieutenant, Colonel Bradley said carefully, perhaps you could walk us through the political and logistical implications of implementing your system. Sarah moved back to the presentation screen, her confidence growing as she realized that she now had the room's complete attention. The Adaptive Foundation System aligns with several current Pentagon initiatives. It supports the Rapid Deployment Doctrine, reduces environmental impact, and significantly lowers long-term operational costs. As she spoke, Sarah outlined how her approach addressed not just the technical challenges but also the broader strategic concerns that were driving the project. Her presentation revealed a sophisticated understanding of military planning that went far beyond simple engineering considerations. The system's modular design also allows for rapid expansion if strategic requirements change, Sarah continued. Traditional foundations would require complete reconstruction for any significant modifications, but the adaptive system can be enhanced incrementally. Richard Hawthorne was now taking detailed notes, his earlier arrogance replaced by the desperate attempt to salvage his position. Would there be opportunities for existing contractors to participate in the implementation of this system? Sarah smiled slightly, recognizing the complete reversal in his attitude. Absolutely, Mr. Hawthorne. The project will require extensive contractor support for logistics, materials procurement, and specialized installation teams. The key is finding partners who can adapt to innovative approaches rather than relying solely on traditional methods. The subtle emphasis on adapt was not lost on anyone in the room. Sarah was making it clear that flexibility and open-mindedness would be essential qualifications for any contractors hoping to participate in the project. Major Wells raised her hand tentatively, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Lieutenant, what role would the Pentagon's Infrastructure Division play in overseeing this implementation? The oversight structure is still being finalized, Sarah replied diplomatically. However, the Secretary's office has emphasized the importance of having personnel with direct field experience in leadership positions. The project's success will depend on understanding both the technical and operational realities of deployment in challenging environments. The message was clear: those who had dismissed her field experience and technical expertise were unlikely to be considered for significant roles in the project's management. As Sarah continued her presentation, she methodically addressed every concern and objection that had been raised earlier in the meeting. Her responses demonstrated not only technical competence, but also a sophisticated understanding of budget constraints, political sensitivities, and operational requirements. The transformation in the room's dynamic was remarkable. The same officials who had been mocking her patches an hour earlier were now hanging on her every word, desperately trying to position themselves as supportive of her innovative approach. Colonel Bradley found himself in the uncomfortable position of realizing that he had completely misjudged both the situation and the young officer standing before him. His earlier dismissiveness now seemed not just unprofessional, but potentially damaging to his own career prospects. "Lieutenant Martinez," he said formally, "I believe we owe you an apology for not giving your expertise the respect it deserved from the beginning of this meeting." Sarah's response was gracious, but firm. "Thank you, Colonel. I understand that unconventional approaches can be challenging to evaluate initially. What matters now is moving forward with the best possible solution for our military's needs." Her diplomatic response only made the others feel worse about their behavior, while demonstrating the kind of leadership and professionalism that clearly marked her as someone destined for significant responsibilities. The meeting was reaching its conclusion when Colonel Bradley's assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Sir, there's been a change to this afternoon's schedule. The Secretary of Defense's office called to confirm that the infrastructure briefing has been moved up to 1400 hours. A collective tension filled the room as everyone realized that the Secretary of Defense himself would be attending the afternoon session. This was no longer a routine briefing among mid-level officials and contractors. It had become a high-stakes presentation that could significantly impact careers and contracts worth millions of dollars. Major Wells looked visibly nervous as she glanced at her watch. "That's in 2 hours. We'll need to prepare summary reports and ensure all documentation is properly formatted for the Secretary's review." Richard Hawthorne was frantically organizing his papers, his earlier confidence completely shattered by the morning's revelations. "Lieutenant Martinez, will you be presenting your alternative proposal to the Secretary?" Sarah nodded calmly, her composure in stark contrast to the anxiety now evident in everyone else. "Yes, the Secretary specifically requested a detailed comparison of all proposed solutions. He's particularly interested in innovative approaches that can now address both immediate operational needs and long-term strategic requirements." The revelation that the Secretary of Defense had specifically requested Sarah's presentation sent another shock through the room. It became clear that her involvement in the project was not coincidental, but had been orchestrated at the highest levels of the Pentagon. Colonel Bradley was beginning to understand that he had stumbled into a situation far more significant than a routine infrastructure briefing. "Lieutenant, how long have you been working directly with the Secretary's office on this project?" "The initial consultations began about 6 months ago," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "The Secretary's Infrastructure Modernization Initiative identified our Afghanistan project as a potential model for broader military applications. I've been working with his Technical Advisory Committee to develop Implementation strategies. The casual mention of working directly with the Secretary's Technical Advisory Committee revealed just how far out of their depth the other meeting participants had been. Sarah wasn't just another junior officer, she was a key advisor on one of the Pentagon's most important strategic initiatives. As the meeting participants began preparing for the afternoon session with the Secretary of Defense, the dynamic in the room had completely reversed. Instead of dismissing Sarah's qualifications, everyone was now seeking her guidance and trying to position themselves favorably for the high-level presentation. "Lieutenant," Major Wells said hesitantly, "would it be possible for you to review our division's preparedness for implementing advanced engineering technologies? I want to ensure we're presenting ourselves in the best possible light to the Secretary." Sarah's response was professional, but revealed her awareness of the morning's dynamics. "Major, I'd be happy to discuss your division's capabilities. However, I should mention that the Secretary's office has asked me to evaluate the readiness and adaptability of various Pentagon departments for participating in modernization initiatives." The implication was clear. Sarah would be reporting back to the Secretary's office about how different departments and officials had responded to innovative proposals. Their earlier dismissiveness and condescension would likely be part of that evaluation. Richard Hawthorne approached Sarah nervously, his entire demeanor transformed from the arrogant contractor of the morning. "Lieutenant, I hope there's still an opportunity for my company to demonstrate our commitment to innovative approaches. We're very interested in learning about new technologies and methodologies." Sarah smiled diplomatically, recognizing the complete reversal in his attitude. "Mr. Hawthorne, adaptability and willingness to embrace new approaches are certainly important qualities for any contractor hoping to work on advanced projects. The Secretary's office values partners who prioritize mission success over traditional practices." As the morning session concluded, Sarah gathered her materials while the other participants hurriedly prepared for what they now realized would be one of the most important meetings of their careers. The young lieutenant they had mocked for her patches was about to present directly to the Secretary of Defense, while they scrambled to avoid looking foolish in front of the nation's highest-ranking defense official. Colonel Bradley approached Sarah as the room began to empty. "Lieutenant, I want to apologize for our earlier assumptions. It's clear that we significantly underestimated both your qualifications and the importance of this project." Sarah's response was gracious, but carried an undertone that made her point clear. "Colonel, I understand that evaluating new ideas and unconventional approaches can be challenging. What's important is that we all focus on providing the Secretary with the best possible information to make informed decisions about our military's future capabilities." As Sarah left the conference room, she could hear the anxious conversations beginning among those who remained behind. They were frantically trying to figure out how to recover from their morning's performance and position themselves favorably for the afternoon session with the Secretary of Defense. The irony of the situation was not lost on Sarah as she walked down the Pentagon corridor. The same officials who had questioned whether her patches represented real achievements were now desperately hoping that their own credentials would withstand scrutiny from the highest levels of military leadership. Her phone buzzed with a text message from the Secretary's office confirming the afternoon agenda and reminding her to bring the classified performance data from the Afghanistan deployment. As she headed to her office to retrieve the necessary documents, Sarah reflected on how dramatically the day had evolved. The morning had begun with colleagues mocking her uniform patches, dismissing her expertise and treating her as an inexperienced observer. Now those same people were anxiously preparing to watch her present cutting-edge military technology to the Secretary of Defense. Knowing that their own careers might depend on how well they had treated the young officer they had so casually dismissed. Sarah's patches, which had been the subject of such ridicule, were about to be examined by the one person in the Pentagon who fully understood their true significance. Each ribbon and insignia represented not just personal achievement but contributions to military capability that had caught the attention of the nation's top defense leadership. As she prepared for the afternoon briefing, Sarah knew that the real test was just beginning, but she also knew that she had already passed the most important evaluation of the day. She had remained professional, competent, and focused on the mission despite facing prejudice and dismissal from colleagues who should have known better. At precisely 1400 hours, The conference room had been transformed into a formal briefing chamber, befitting a presentation to the Secretary of Defense. The mahogany table was arranged with precise military protocol. Documents were organized in perfect order, and every participant sat with the rigid posture that high-level Pentagon meetings demanded. The tension in the room was palpable as officials and contractors waited for the Secretary's arrival. Colonel Bradley adjusted his tie for the third time in 5 minutes, while Major Wells reviewed her notes with the desperate intensity of someone whose career might depend on the next hour. Richard Hawthorne sat silently, his earlier arrogance replaced by obvious anxiety about how his morning performance might be perceived. Sarah sat calmly at the presentation position, her materials organized and her confidence evident. Unlike the others in the room, she had briefed senior leadership before and understood that competence and preparation were far more important than nervousness or political maneuvering. The room fell into complete silence as the secretary's aide entered and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Secretary of Defense." Secretary James Morrison entered the room with the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected national security and military operations around the world. At 62 years old, he had served in both military and civilian leadership positions, giving him a unique perspective on the challenges facing modern defense infrastructure. "Please be seated," Secretary Morrison said as he took his position at the head of the table. His eyes quickly scanned the room, taking note of each participant before settling on Sarah. "Lieutenant Martinez, I understand you have some innovative solutions to present regarding our Eastern European infrastructure challenges." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, standing and moving to the presentation screen with the same confidence she had displayed throughout the morning. Secretary Morrison's attention was immediately focused on Sarah's uniform, but unlike the others in the room, his examination was informed by decades of military experience. His eyes moved from patch to patch, and Sarah could see the recognition dawning in his expression as he identified the significance of her various ribbons and insignia. "Lieutenant," the secretary said slowly, "that's an impressive collection of achievements for someone of your rank and age. The 82nd Airborne Engineering Patch, the Humanitarian Mission Ribbon from Haiti, and is that the DARPA Innovation Award?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied respectfully. "The Innovation Award was for the adaptive foundation system I'll be presenting today." Secretary Morrison nodded with visible approval. "I've read the classified reports from Afghanistan. Your work at Phobie Resilience was remarkable. Please proceed with your briefing." The other meeting participants exchanged nervous glances as they realized that the secretary was not only familiar with Sarah's background but clearly held her work in high regard. Their morning's dismissiveness was now looking like a serious error in judgment. Sarah began her presentation with the same technical competence she had displayed earlier, but now she was addressing someone who fully understood the strategic implications of her innovations. Secretary Morrison asked detailed questions about implementation timelines, cost projections, and scalability to other applications. The adaptive system represents a fundamental shift in how we approach infrastructure development in challenging environments, Sarah explained, highlighting the technical diagrams on the screen. Instead of fighting against natural conditions, we work with them to create more resilient and cost-effective solutions. Secretary Morrison studied the technical specifications with obvious interest. "Lieutenant, what was the total cost savings compared to traditional methods in the Afghanistan deployment?" "Approximately 47%, sir, with a 60% reduction in construction time and a 95% improvement in long-term durability based on 3 years of operational data." The figures were staggering, and everyone in the room understood their significance. Sarah wasn't just proposing an alternative approach. She was presenting a technology that could revolutionize military construction while saving taxpayers millions of dollars. Richard Hawthorne shifted uncomfortably in his seat as he realized that his 18-month, $47 million proposal was being compared to a solution that could achieve better results in 8 months for $35 million. Secretary Morrison turned his attention to the other participants in the meeting. "I'd like to hear from the rest of the team about their assessment of Lieutenant Martinez's proposal." Colonel Bradley cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, Lieutenant Martinez's presentation has been very enlightening. Her technical expertise and practical experience are clearly valuable assets for this project." The secretary's Expression suggested that he could sense the diplomatic language being used to cover earlier skepticism. Colonel, I'm interested in your initial assessment when Lieutenant Martinez first presented these ideas. The question put Colonel Bradley in an impossible position. Admitting that he had initially dismissed Sarah's qualifications would reveal his poor judgment. But attempting to claim support from the beginning would be dishonest and easily disproven. Sir, I believe we may have initially underestimated the scope of Lieutenant Martinez's expertise, Bradley admitted reluctantly. Secretary Morrison's expression hardened slightly as he realized what had transpired during the morning session. As someone who had risen through the ranks himself, he understood the prejudices that young officers often faced, particularly those who challenge conventional thinking. Major Wells, the secretary said, turning his attention to another participant, what's your assessment of the adaptive foundation system's potential for broader military applications? Major Wells stumbled slightly as she attempted to provide an enthusiastic endorsement of the same proposal she had dismissed hours earlier. Sir, the system appears to offer significant advantages in terms of both operational efficiency and cost-effectiveness. Secretary Morrison's eyes moved to Richard Hawthorne. Mr. Hawthorne, how does your company's traditional approach compare to Lieutenant Martinez's innovative system? Hawthorne's face flushed as he realized he had no choice but to acknowledge the superiority of the proposal he had earlier ridiculed. Sir, Lieutenant Martinez's system offers compelling advantages that our traditional methods cannot match. We would be very interested in adapting our capabilities to support this innovative approach. The secretary listened to each response with the understanding of someone who had seen similar dynamics play out countless times throughout his career. Promising young officers with innovative ideas often faced resistance from established officials and contractors who preferred familiar approaches over potential improvements. Lieutenant Martinez, Secretary Morrison said, returning his attention to Sarah, I want to commend you not only for your technical innovations but for your professionalism in what I suspect has been a challenging day. Sarah's response was characteristically modest and professional. Thank you, sir. My focus has been on ensuring that our military has access to the best possible solutions for critical infrastructure challenges. Secretary Morrison stood, indicating that the briefing was concluding. Lieutenant, I want you to prepare for immediate implementation of your adaptive system for the Eastern European project. You'll have full authority to select contractors and personnel based on their ability to support innovative approaches rather than their adherence to traditional methods. The implications of the Secretary's statement were clear to everyone in the room. Sarah was being given authority to determine who would participate in a major military construction project, and their morning performance would undoubtedly influence her decisions. As Secretary Morrison prepared to leave the briefing room, he paused and turned back to address the assembled group one final time. His expression carried the weight of someone who had witnessed too many instances of promising talent being dismissed due to prejudice and narrow thinking. Before I go, the secretary said, his voice carrying unmistakable authority, I want to share something with all of you about the young officer you've been working with today. The room fell into absolute silence as everyone waited for the secretary's words, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez didn't just develop an innovative foundation system in Afghanistan, Secretary Morrison continued, his gaze moving from person to person around the table. She saved the lives of 43 soldiers when their convoy was ambushed while returning from a construction site. While treating wounded personnel under enemy fire, she also managed to coordinate the defense of their position until reinforcements arrived. The silence in the room deepened as the full implications of the secretary's words sank in. Sarah's expert field medical badge wasn't just another patch. It represented her actions during one of the most dangerous situations any soldier could face. The humanitarian ribbon from Haiti, Secretary Morrison continued. Lieutenant Martinez designed and built water purification systems that prevented a cholera epidemic that could have killed thousands of people. She worked 18-hour days for 6 weeks straight, often going without sleep to ensure the systems remained operational. Major Wells felt a cold realization wash over her as she remembered her dismissive comments about participation trophies and diversity hires. Each of Sarah's patches represented achievements that far exceeded anything she herself had accomplished during her entire military career. The DARPA Innovation Award, Secretary Morrison went on, was given for developing technology that has since been classified as critical to national security. Lieutenant Martinez's work has implications far beyond military construction. It represents a fundamental advancement in how we approach infrastructure development in hostile environments. Richard Hawthorne sat in stunned silence, remembering his condescending comments about experimental nonsense and untested theories. The young woman he had dismissed as inexperienced had actually developed technology that the nation's top defense officials considered crucial to national security. Secretary Morrison's attention focused on Colonel Bradley. "Colonel, I'm told that there were some initial concerns about Lieutenant Martinez's qualifications for this assignment. I hope today's briefing has addressed those concerns." Colonel Bradley's face had gone pale as he realized that the secretary was clearly aware of how Sarah had been treated during the morning session. "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Martinez has demonstrated exceptional expertise and professionalism." "Excellent," Secretary Morrison replied, his tone suggesting that he expected nothing less than complete support for Sarah's work going forward. "Lieutenant Martinez will be reporting directly to my office on the progress of this project. I want to ensure that she has all the resources and cooperation necessary to implement her innovative solutions." The message was unmistakably clear. Sarah now had the direct backing of the highest levels of Pentagon leadership, and anyone who chose to obstruct her work would be answering to the Secretary of Defense himself. As Secretary Morrison moved toward the door, he paused one final time and addressed Sarah directly. "Lieutenant, when I see a young officer like yourself, someone who combines technical innovation with battlefield courage and humanitarian service, it reminds me why I believe in the future of our military." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied, maintaining her professional composure despite the obvious pride she felt at the secretary's recognition. "Those patches on your uniform," Secretary Morrison added, gesturing toward Sarah's ribbons and insignia, "represent the kind of service and achievement that makes our nation stronger. Anyone who fails to recognize their significance is someone who doesn't understand what real military excellence looks like." With that final statement, Secretary Morrison left the briefing room, leaving behind a group of officials and contractors who now fully understood the magnitude of their morning's misjudgment. In the silence that followed the secretary's departure, Sarah began gathering her presentation materials, while the others sat in various states of embarrassment and regret. The young lieutenant they had mocked for her participation trophies had just been publicly praised by the Secretary of Defense for achievements that exceeded anything they could have imagined. Colonel Bradley was the first to break the silence. "Lieutenant Martinez, I want to formally apologize for our earlier assumptions. Your service record and technical expertise are clearly exceptional, and you deserved better treatment from this office." Sarah's response was gracious but firm. "Colonel, I appreciate your apology. What's important now is ensuring that we work together effectively to implement the best possible solutions for our military's infrastructure needs." Richard Hawthorne approached Sarah hesitantly, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by genuine remorse. "Lieutenant, I hope my company will still have the opportunity to support your project. I realize now that I completely misjudged both the situation and your qualifications." "Mr. Hawthorne," Sarah replied diplomatically, "I'll be evaluating all potential contractors based on their ability to adapt to innovative approaches and their commitment to mission success rather than traditional practices." Major Wells stood slowly, her confidence from the morning completely shattered. "Lieutenant, I want you to know that our department is fully prepared to support your work in any way necessary." As the meeting participants filed out of the conference room, each carrying the weight of their morning's performance, Sarah remained behind for a moment to collect her thoughts. The day had begun with colleagues questioning whether her patches represented real achievements. It was ending with the Secretary of Defense publicly praising those same patches as examples of exceptional military service. The transformation had been remarkable, but Sarah understood that the real work was just beginning. She had been given the authority and resources to implement revolutionary technology that could change how the military approached infrastructure development. More importantly, She had been entrusted with proving that innovative thinking and unconventional approaches could deliver better results than traditional methods. As Sarah walked through the Pentagon corridors toward her office, she reflected on the lessons of the day. Her patches had indeed told a story, not just of her own achievements, but of the military's potential when it embraced innovation, diversity, and the contributions of all its members regardless of their age, rank, or background. The officials who had mocked her uniform patches that morning would now watch as those same patches led a project that could revolutionize military engineering. It was a powerful reminder that true leadership comes not from titles or positions, but from competence, courage, and the willingness to pursue excellence even in the face of skepticism and resistance. The Secretary of Defense had stood when she walked in, not just physically, but in recognition of everything her service represented. And in doing so, he had shown everyone else in the room what real military leadership looked like.